Hello and welcome to a Make and Mingle tutorial video. Today we are going to be making this coiled rope vessel, and if you are looking for the materials that you will need, you can find that in a Google Drive folder. The link will be below in the description, as well as if you have any questions, you can either comment on the video itself or you can use the provided email that is in there to contact me, and I'll be happy to help you as soon as I'm able to get to my email to help you figure out what we're working on. But this video should give you all the basics that you need to be able to get started with from the bottom, get all of your stitches in, add different colors or further links if you need more thread, and to finish it off. There are multiple different ways that you can finish it. This is the way that I will be showing you how to do it because it is the way that I found I liked the look of the most and was relatively easy to be able to make it look nice when you finished it off. But once you know all of those basics, you can do all kinds of different things. You can make coasters, you can make a bowl, or you can even make a variety of different sizes that could be baskets for knickknacks or whatever else that there is around the home. As I mentioned, there is a supply list down below, but a really quick run through on the supply list and what we included in our craft kits for the program that we hosted. There is going to be rope. Our rope is about 9/32 inch, but you just don't want it to be too small or too large. Anything kind of in this range will work fine. If you're doing a larger project, you might want to use a thicker rope. If you're doing something really simple or small, a smaller one might work, but I would say aim for something that's around this size or larger. And if it's going to be larger, you may want to do something that is bigger, because if it's really big and bulky, you might find that it's more difficult to manipulate the way that you need it to. In addition to that, you're going to need embroidery thread or similar thread of that weight. We used embroidery thread because it is the one that I saw used the most frequently, and embroidery thread comes in such a wide variety of colors that it is more fun to be able to personalize something. I would recommend for the size of project we will be doing 2 skeins, but it depends on how big your project is. You might need more, you might need less. Finally, you are going to need scissors and a needle. You can also use a needle threader. We provided needle threaders because embroidery floss is many threads or strands together, and a threader was going to make it much easier to be able to easily thread these. You might also want tape if you are cutting off your rope from your bundle, because it might be what you need in order to create the look you're going for. And you might want glue or something like that for finishing at points. I don't recommend, or I did not recommend it for what we're doing because I haven't really found a need, but you might find you want to use it. Alright, so the very first step, you are going to take your rope and you are going to take your needle and get it threaded. So I'm going to find the end of my embroidery floss here. Now, if you are using a threader, particularly if it's one similar to this, which are pretty darn cheap, you thread it through. It'll focus on the fingers, and when you pull it all the way through, don't hold on the base, hold on the wires. Instead of holding down here, hold here. This is because these are really cheap. Don't poke yourself, I almost did there. These are really cheap, and the wire that's at the end here that you use, it can actually pull out of this metal piece, this tinny piece really easily. And so I've found to avoid pulling the pieces out and having to throw it away and grab another one, if you hold the wire while you're pulling it through with your fingers also holding onto the back a little bit as well, it helps stabilize it so it doesn't pull itself apart so easily. The heavier the thread that you're working with and the smaller the eye of the needle, the more is being put on that when you're trying to pull it through, and the less likely it is to fall apart. If you're working with something relatively small or the eye of the needle is pretty big, you don't need it to be especially concerned about it, but that's just one of those little tips that I have learned over the years of crafting that I wanted to pass on to you to try to make sure that it lasts a little bit longer for you. So the next step after it is threaded is to take your string, your embroidery thread, and get a long chunk prepared. I do basically my arm's length and a little bit further. And then cut it down. In the piece that you cut, put a knot at the end. If you use a single knot, it should be enough, but I frequently do a second knot if I can get it on top of the first one, just to make sure it is a big enough knot that I'm not going to accidentally, and then I accidentally put it way too high there. I'll do a second knot on top of the other one, just to make sure that I don't pull too hard and then end up pulling it right through what I'm doing, because then it kind of defeats the purpose of having the knot. You can cut it pretty darn close to the knot. And now your needle is threaded. You don't want your string to be too long, because the longer it is, the easier it is for it to tangle on itself and create knots, and we don't want that. Now, to get your coil started and for the base of your project, you are going to coil it around itself tightly. And you can leave the tape on the end. I choose, when I did these, to leave the tape on the end. There are ways to do it in different formats. If you're using a plastic rope, ours is more in the cotton polyester vein, but if it's the heavier plastic one, instead of having tape, you can use the bit of flame to keep the ends from fraying. You can also wrap around it the thread, and that thread will help it from fraying, but I prefer this method. And you're just going to wrap it around just a couple of times, and taking your thread, you're going to go through all layers, and I'm going to start at this point here, and I'm going to go straight across. Careful not to poke myself, and I'm doing my best to try to get it as much in the middle as I can. The more in the middle you get that, instead of closer to either edges, the more it will be hidden in the coil, and people won't see your edges. You just pull it all the way through until you get to your knot, and you can see the knot disappeared in there a fair bit, which is why I like to double knot it, to just kind of help it from going all the way through. And then the next step is to go through the other direction, completely perpendicular. Oop, and it went through on me. Adjust that a little bit. Oh, that's pretty centered. I'm good there. This is the hardest stitches to do because it's going through multiple layers and a little bit of that tape as well. So you'll notice that this is a little difficult to pull it through. Just keep working it on until you get it all the way through. And now we have the first part done. Now, I always have to kind of situate myself. I like it when it coils specifically this way. So my coil is going clockwise. And now I can start my stitches. So you are going to be going, this is one coil here. Let's come up closer so you can see this detail. So we have one coil here, and then this is a second coil. I'm gonna go down to the bottom of the second coil, and I am just pushing it right through. And I'm trying to make sure that I'm going through the very edge of that coil. I'll do it a few times so that we can see. The second stitch is going to go through the top of that second coil. But then you just keep repeating that. So we're going to be going to the bottom. I'm catching a little bit of that coil when I push it through, pulling it through. And top of it. And bottom again. Bottom. See, it's the bottom of it. Come a little bit closer and make sure you're seeing. One more time. All the way to the bottom. You can kind of adjust it if you want to. And top. All right, and you just keep going like that until you get the base completed. Things to note, you are going back and forth constantly, and the spacing, you don't need to be too concerned with how much it is. Just try to keep it relatively even between your spaces, but even now you can see this is a little bit skinnier, this is a little bit wider. The more even it is, the more neat it will probably look. But it's really hard to do it, especially once you get past that first circle and you start adding on top of your threads. It's a little bit more difficult to keep it neat and tidy, which is why you'll find that this is one of those craft projects that takes a fair bit of practice and a lot of running through this craft project before you really are able to get it to look the way you might want it to look. But you'll notice that when you finish it, it still looks pretty nice, it's still very fun, and it's something that you will have made with your own hands. Alright, and we will consider the base of our project done when we have about 5 rows. You can see right here is our center. This is our taped piece. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the opposite direction, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now we're going to start building it up. For our specific project, we're going straight up. So I'm going to put it directly on top. But if you were doing like a bowl or just a general basket, you'd put it at a slight angle. But we're going to be going straight up. And let's see how well I can show you. It's a little bit more difficult to do this on camera. I'm used to doing it like this. This is how I usually do it, but I want to make sure you can see what I'm doing, so bear with me. I'm doing this slightly different. So I have it directly on top of itself, And my last stitch was a long stitch, so I'm doing a short stitch. So I'm going to be pushing it directly in close to the top, like I'm doing it at the top of that second row like I normally would. And then when I come out, I'm trying to come out pretty close to the top of that because I want it to kind of blend in to the coil of the rope. And then pull it pretty tight to make sure I'm getting it to go on, stay on top like that. Now the next one is going to be the bottom. And then I just keep doing that. Note that when you're doing this, when you're doing any of your stitches, you want to make sure that you don't accidentally go on the inside of that. So don't, I'll show you what I mean. Don't go like this, because you'll tie a knot. Make sure you stay on the outside so that you don't create a knot. But you just keep going. With your first row here. Oh, and then I like immediately did it on accident. Relatively easy to fix if you do that, but just something to be aware of and try to avoid. I think that's why I prefer to do it the other direction, because it's easier for me to make sure I don't go on top of myself. I'm going to turn it around now that you have seen what I'm doing, because this should make my life slightly easier. So I'm getting kind of close to the end of my embroidery thread. So let's see how far I can get. And I'll show you how to finish it off next here. And I have a tendency as I'm going to kind of make sure that it's molding right. But it's still not perfect. The other ones that I have done, they definitely either like will be more like a vase where it's like wider at the bottom, goes in, it comes out again. I have one that kind of tapers all the way up a little bit. Don't let it bother you. This is one of those types of things where because it is soft, it's not going to look perfect, and that's part of its charm. Allow yourself to have fun with creating something. Alright, so now I'm getting to the second row where I'm no longer building on top. So now I'm going back to how I was doing it before, but I'm kind of doing a little bit of both those original stitches and the building on top of stitch. But I also am very short, as you can see. You might be able to eke out a bit more. I don't want to chance it, and I'm going to go ahead and do one more long stitch here. Because I prefer to end each strand on a short stitch. You can do this in a couple of different ways, but I personally have found the one I'm going to show you to be the easiest, simply because the others are really hard to see exactly what you're doing. If you figure out a different way to finish it, you're probably going to be fine. I've seen some where after you tie the knot, you hide the end into the rope itself, but I made a mess of it, so I'm not going to show you how to do that because I can't confidently do that one. So we're going to turn this around one more time. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to act like I'm doing a stitch, but instead of going all the way across, I'm going to go in to the top. So I'm trying to keep it as on top of the rope as possible because I want to hide the knot I'm about to tie under the next row that goes on top as much as possible. So now I have created a bit of a loop. I'm going to stitch it under one. I'm going to make sure I pull this tight and push it through again. And then pull it through here to create my knot. Go ahead and pull off my needle. Cut pretty close to the edge. There isn't a lot of like pull on the simpler project that we're doing, so I'm not too terribly worried about it potentially coming apart. So I'm going to thread this through. I don't want it to be in the exact same spot because I don't want the knot to just travel through where the rest of the tension is. So I'm creating a slightly different spot, but I'm still trying to make sure that I can bury that knot under the next rope. And then make sure it's on this side of the rope. So remember, we pull through and then come out. So that was a short stitch. So my next stitch with my new thread is going to be a long stitch. Pull it through, and I can just get right back into my stitching. Short and long. And at this point I start to kind of pay attention to what is going on the other side, and I do kind of try to make sure my stitches are spaced out a little bit better, and I try to do in between the gaps. So here, between here, and long one between here, and I'll flip it over so that I can see the other side and make sure it's going through where I want it to go. And that's it. You now know the basics that you need to know to be able to do the rest of this part. It is just doing stitching back and forth, long, short, always going through that second rope, not the first one, the second one, all the way up, tying a knot when you get to the end of a length of your string or your embroidery thread, adding a new one, and continuing it on. All right, so when you start getting to the end of your rope, the length, or you start getting to the size of whatever project you're doing, you can decide to call it quits, and I will show you how to finish that off. And also, I don't know how easy it's to tell, but the top of this one is narrower than the base. It annoys me vaguely, but I also feel like this is going to be more sturdy than my other one is when it holds pencils because the base is larger. So, happy accidents. I'm gonna go with that. But when you've made the decision to end what you're working on, look for where you start building on top of your base. So you can see right here, this is where I started coiling the bottom onto the top of the base. And that is going to create a point, which might be hard to see on the video, but this is slightly lower than this area. So I will finish it right here. And in order to finish it, and I'll show you what it looks like again, we're creating a tassel. And all you have to do to make sure this top part is attached is we're just doing the short stitch over and over right next to itself. So you go right next to, and I have another stitch right here, and I'm just going to go right next to that one. Pull it through. I'm doing my best to make sure that when it comes through on this side, it's as tidy as possible because it's going to be very noticeable. And I want this to look very nice. So we just keep going and push the thread so it's nice and tight to itself, and just keep going. And once you have it about the width you want it to be, right around my thumb's width is what I ended up going with there, we're going to finish this off. And to do that, I'm going to catch a little bit of the base of the rope, but I'm going to pull it, instead of going to the back, I'm going to just go right there. Then I'm going to feed it all the way through under the threads. Pull it tight. You might want to knot it before you pull it through. That is up to you. Pull it nice and tight once you thread that end through. Snip it and then tug it slightly so that the end is now buried in there. And then to create the tassel, you just determine how long you want it to be. And without taping or anything else, you just chop off the end. And you can do this a couple of different ways. I start by working the braid part. And you can leave it like that if you want, thick tassel, or you can lay it flat, and I used my needle to help comb and pick these out, starting at the base. Tidy it up a little bit more. And there you have it. This is the finished product. And I can use it for a variety of things, but it works really well as a pen holder. I hope you're able to follow this tutorial well, that you have fun using this new skill, creating all kinds of different fun projects. Go ahead and post pictures of those projects on social media, whether it's on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, and tag us. We are located at all of those different places. Thank you so much. I hope you'll join us for our next Make and Mingle craft tutorial. Thank you.